One of the argument forms we've talked about was the reasoning by transitivity argument. And let me just cover a little bit more on that. And that's the one where you had P arrow Q, Q arrow R, conclusion, P arrow R. And one thing that we might note there is that argument form, that could be extended however far we wanted to extend it. Here's what I mean by that. If I if I kept that going, let's say I went P arrow Q, Q arrow R, I could keep that going and keep my premises, adding premises here. So I could, what happens on these, if we notice, on each premise, the next premise starts with what the last premise ended with, right? P arrow Q, so this one started with Q, then we have Q arrow R, so if I added a premise, what would it start with? Start with R, right? With me? So R arrow S, and then if I added another premise, it would start with S, so we could say S arrow T, and we could keep that going. Now, let's also note, let's say we cut it off at 4 premises. What we also could note is, if that's where I stopped, then the conclusion, notice here, the conclusion was P arrow R, which P and then arrow R. What would this one, if I stopped here, what would the conclusion be, you think? It would be P arrow T, right? P arrow T, because that's the one, that's what I stopped with on the premises. All right, with me there? Now here's another little, so that's the extended version, or one extended version. I could keep that going. I call it sometimes referred to as the chain, kind of the chain law. Yes, ma'am.
So like, even if it like starts with like, let's say if it's an if then it start with like a Q or something, do you still put the P to?
Yeah, if you start.
That's
so,
always how you start.
Yeah, it's all how you start. So let's do that. All right. So let's say we do Q arrow P instead. All right. Then the second one is P arrow, and let's even do this, not S. We could throw in some negations, if you will, of statements. Now, if I do that, so again, you keep the chain going, so it's Q arrow P, so I started this one with P. So we're good. Now, for the next one, if I add a third premise, what would it have to start with? The not S, arrow, not T, let's say. And let's just say that's it, all right? So let's say those 3 premises are in my transitivity argument here. What would be the conclusion? Q, arrow, not T. All right? So we could extend that transitivity a lot of different ways. Now, here's what else we can do. All right, so let's say I've got S arrow Q, P arrow not Q, not R arrow S. Those are the premises. So let's rearrange those and give a valid conclusion. Rearrange and give a valid conclusion. All right. So hopefully there you're with me. As they are, I don't have those where I could give a valid conclusion. Why not? Well, they're not chained together, right? This starts S arrow Q, but then this picks up at P. That's not the way order I need them, is it? Okay. All right, so that's what I mean by rearranging, first of all. Now, what I would say to you here is this one I don't want to start with S arrow Q. And the reason is, if I start with S arrow Q, it's not going to work out, because if you'll notice on the premises, any of these three, the one I start with, there's only one occurrence of it in the premises. And the one I end with only has one occurrence. The others have more than one occurrence. You know what I'm saying? So S here, there's two occurrences of S. So that's what I'm saying. I don't want to start with S because I've got two of it. Which one would I start with?
P.
P, yeah. There's only one P, or I could start with not R. But yeah, let's put the P arrow Q, not Q first. All right, now, you with me there? Start with the P arrow, not Q. Now tell me, what does the second line need to start with?
Q.
It needs to start with not Q, doesn't it? Because that's the way this works. Whatever you stop here with, it starts on the next line with that. Right?
Right.
Okay? So I need to start with not Q. Is there one that has a not Q in it? So I've used this one.
The top
No.
one.
The top one has a Q in it, but it doesn't start with not Q. However, what do I know about equivalent statement? What's an equivalent statement to that? Isn't the contrapositive equivalent? Contrapositive equivalent. So if I use the contrapositive equivalent to that, remember the contrapositive flips and negates? So if I flip and negate that first one there, what have I got? Not Q, arrow, not S. All right? Now it's set up because it stops here with not Q, starts here with not Q. All right, what's the next one need to start with?
Not
It
S.
needs to start with not S. All right, well this one, same deal on that one, right? It needs to start with not S, but I don't have a not S. But if I do the contrapositive of that, not S, arrow, R, because it flips and negates, what's the conclusion? P, arrow, R. P, arrow. So that's my valid conclusion. If P, then R. Okay. So, here's what we're going to do with that. So, with all those steps in mind, on the handout there, that I gave you, what we've got is we've got three statements. P is he is going to a party. Q, he brushes his hair. And then R, he looks fascinating. We're going to do this very same thing. We just have the statements written as actual statements. So let's, here's the thing. So A is all men brush their hair. All men that brush their hair look fascinating. Okay, so what I want you to do here on these is write that in if-then form. Well, if-then form of that is if, and using these statements, if he brushes his hair, because that's, which one is that? Q. That's our Q statement. He brushes his hair is a Q statement. Then he looks fascinating. These are kind of strange, I know. But have you ever heard of Lewis Carroll? He wrote Alice in Wonderland. He was big into the logic. And this is some things like he would write. So he used a lot of logic here, and so this is were put together, something like he would have written, and it's logically valid here, but with me there? If he brushes his hair, then he looks fascinating. That's the rewrite of that in if-then form. Now what is that in symbols? So that, like I said, Q is he brushes his hair, he looks fascinating, is R, right? R, yeah. And we've also got an S. He is untitled. All right. Then on B, okay, so no one that is untidy looks fascinating. All right, so if-then form of that, well, there's a couple of ways you could go. This is the way I typically do it. If I put the no part here, if I keep it in the same order, the no part actually goes with the fascinating part, the second part. So if one is untidy, or if he is untidy, then he doesn't look fascinating. And I noticed on some of yours, you wrote it that other way of that. That's fine. It's the contrapositive of that, and that's fine. But in this order, that's the way it works. All right, now, he is untidy, that's the S statement. If he is untidy, if one is untidy, he is untidy. So that's S. He does not look fascinating. Well, the fascinating one is R. This doesn't look fascinating, so that's not R. So that would be the symbols for that. Okay? All right, then C, one more, then we're ready. All right, so men that go to parties always brush their hair. All right, so if he goes to a party, then he brushes his hair, right? That would be the if-then form of that. Which in symbols would be that he goes to a party, that's the P, and then he brushes his hair, which one's that? The Q? That's the Q. All right. So in symbols, this is what we got. Now, the second part of this, all right, so now rearrange these premises and give a valid conclusion. Because as these are, they don't line up right. We've got to use that transitivity stuff, right? Because I can't start here with Q. For one thing, I've got two Qs, and I always want to start with one that has one occurrence. So which one could I start with? P. Okay, I can start with P. All right, so let's start with P. P arrow Q. Now what? So I use this one. Now I can go to this one, can't I? Because this one stopped with Q, so I need to start with Q on this one. Q arrow R is what that one is. So the second one is this one. Now what's the third one? Obviously I've got to use this one.
Contrapositive would be?
I've got to use the contrapositive, yeah. Obviously it doesn't start with R. However, if I use the contrapositive, the flip and negate, right? Contrapositive. Flip that and negate it. R arrow, not S. Would be the contrapositive of that. We're good. So those are the premises. What's the conclusion? P arrow, not S. So in words, that would be the P is if he goes to a party, then not S, well, the S is untidy, then he is not untidy. Okay? Now, the second, or the last, so that's our conclusion. The other question I asked on this handout, though, is there another valid conclusion? And the answer is yes. So another way we could do this, so we started here with the P, but could not just as very well as have started with the S. I could have started with the S. So that would have been S arrow not R. Use that one. Then the next one, I could go to the contrapositive of this, right? Flip and negate. Not R arrow not Q. Takes care of that one. And then the contrapositive of that, not Q arrow not P. I could have done it that way and gotten S arrow not P. So that would have been another way to do it. Now, notice here those two are exactly the same though, because what are those of each other? That one, isn't it the contrapositive of this one? So those are equivalent. Those are equivalent. So anyway, just some interesting little